The Russian Revolution is the long-awaited sequel to The Kingsman 1914, and as a product shows you that with just a dash of spice-bad decisions and a sprinkling of anarchy, you too can create a fully stable country that everyone loves. Maybe. 19th century Russia. Feudal, underdeveloped, and so stuck in the past that even Marty McFly couldn't get back. While much of Europe was pimping out their nations, Russian leaders had a difficult time doing that while having the time of their lives at the latest Tchaikovsky concert. The Russian government was set up so the czars had complete control. Want to make people pour milk first instead of cereal? Why not? Want to run your country like a backward feudal kingdom that doesn't educate their people so they don't get any ideas and extort the farmers like the slaves that they are while in the midst of a food crisis? That is your God-given right. Along came Tsar Alexander II. The new czar on the block started to make reforms to Russia, like freeing the serfs from slavery, only later for them to continue to work for free because of the massive student loans they have to pay off. Alexander was so proud of his work that he must have thought everyone loved him, right? Wrong. Although progress has been made, plenty of people started to question the authority of the czars. As a result of that, in 1881, Alexander was busting it down at the club when a revolutionary decided to throw an explosive surprise party. Luckily, there was another Alexander around that would be king. Alexander III didn't really like the reforms his dad put in place, so he reformed those reforms and repressed religious minorities and non-Russians and introduced a sweet new secret police called the Okhrana. Nicholas II, the son of Alexander III, was to be the next czar, but his dad hasn't yet taught him how to rule the country. His father also called him a girly girl. Instead of teaching Nicholas what he needed to know, Alexander suggested that he go elsewhere. So Nicholas went to Japan to hang out with the boys and watch anime. As Nicholas returned, his father finally gave in to teaching him about how to rule. But Alexander died right before his lesson. Nicholas was not ready to lead whatsoever, but he's going to give it his best shot. Following his coronation as king, he held a big party giving away free pretzels and beer. However, this was so appealing to the starving people that 1,500 people were killed in the stampede. Nicholas was sent an invitation to a rager that was going on in France, and he decided to go. This immediately tarnished his image as people were furious about his lack of respect for the dead. Many people knew that the rule under the Tsars needed to go, and one such man had an idea: Vladimir Lenin. He was a very radical and angry man who looked closely related to that one guy from Breaking Bad. His group loved the idea of communism, an idea that was made up by a dude named Karl Marx. Many today think of communism as, well, but to the people under a tough czarist regime, it was the greatest thing in the entire world. After serving some time in Siberia, Lenin moved to Europe where he could curate his communist newspaper and talk with other Russian communists. Lenin often, always disagreed with others within the group, which caused a rift to form in the party. Lenin and his supporters were called the majority, or Bolshevik in Russian, whereas the others were called the minority, or Menshevik. But oftentimes the majority was in the minority, and the minority in the majority. But Lenin still sat in Europe, waiting for a communist revolution. Another player comes in, Sergei White. A trusted advisor to the Tsar, knew something had to be done about the unhappy people in Russia. Nicholas, the timid, easily swayed man that he is, let him do his thing. Sergei got some money, made some factories, to make some money. Or that's what he hoped. Many workers were still unhappy, so they striked. With all this going on, Nicholas had a thought. Let's go to war with a weak nation so the people will love me again. So they did. As a result, many people were unhappy with the Tsar. A priest named Father Gapone decided to march to the Winter Palace in a peaceful protest, with a petition. Soldiers were placed outside of the Winter Palace to stop the protest, with bullets. 200 people were killed and more than 500 others were wounded. The 1905 revolution had begun. Strikes became more prevalent, and the military started to mutiny against their officers. Local elected councils called Soviets coordinated strikes and supplied workers. After some convincing, Nicholas allowed the liberals to have some political power. They called it the Duma. Although he satisfied one group of people, many others were still unhappy, but Nicholas didn't really care, so he killed them. Although he gave some political power to the Duma, Nicholas passed more laws that basically invalidated their voices. And just like that, Nicholas the Menace to Society survived the revolution. Russia's new top dog was now a man named Pyotr Stolypin, who had a game plan for the new Russia. With some changes, however, Russia's economy gradually improved. Lenin, still in Europe, didn't like that things were going better for the people. If they weren't suffering, then how will the communist revolution come about? Well, in jumps a new character, Joseph Stalin. Stalin was really good at a lot of things, like kidnapping, robbing, bribing, ransoming, extorting, assassinating, prison breaking, stealing, bank raiding, executions, and stealing again. All that's good and all, but he eventually got exiled to Siberia. But he did establish him as a big balls Bolshevik. Then enters the legend himself, Rasputin. Rasputin was a dirt-poor peasant from dirt-poor nowhere, but he made a name for himself because of his alleged healing powers. The Tsar's son had hemophilia, caused by a lot of incest. So when word of Rasputin reached the royal palace, they immediately sent him a letter to come to the palace to heal their son. Rasputin really did end up healing their son, allegedly, and grew close to the Tsar. But Rasputin wasn't just a healer, he was a freaky healer. All is well in Russia. One day, a certain Duke of Austria decided to go round town with his top down, and now the entirety of Europe is at war with each other. With a great war going on and insufficient supplies for the army, people were now starving again. Nicholas went to become commander-in-chief on the front lines of the war, and left his German wife to fight a war against German people. Rasputin was also there. Many nobles didn't like it, and thought that Rasputin was the one destroying Russia now that the Tsar was gone, so they devised many plans to kill Rasputin. Although Rasputin's death was shrouded in mystery and speculation, what his death did do was ruin the Tsar's reputation. On National Women's Day, the women workers in the factories were fed up with being hungry and took to the streets. The men did the next day. Soldiers were ordered to quell the rebellions, but who knew? Soldiers get hungry too, so they mutinied. Over the next few days, riots would erupt across Petrograd, and they would all come to ask for the abdication of the Tsar. After hearing news of the riots in the capital, Nicholas boarded a train to go back to the next day. But he never made it. Nicholas was met by a covenant of generals and politicians that were persuaded by the liberals that if they got Nicholas to abdicate the throne, all would be well. And so he did. These events would be known as the February Revolution. Even though the Tsar was gone, Russia was still at war with Germany. With the Russian government in shambles, a dual power struggle began between the Duma, now the Provisional Government, and the local Soviets. The Provisional Government became the official government, and the local Soviets resided over enforcing their actions. Although it didn't look like much, it was progress. Lenin didn't really like what was going on, so when Germany knocked on his door to ask him to incite a revolution, he gladly accepted. When Lenin got back, he had to reform his party into something that people would want, coming up with a new motto: peace, land, bread. Lenin also called for all power to go to the Soviets. Remember, these are unions ran by workers, not politicians. This made the Bolsheviks more popular, but as long as the provisional government didn't mess up, everything would be fine. But that didn't really happen. The provisional government was in power for 9 months, but those 9 months were filled with chaos. The poor got poorer, and the hungry got hungrier. Riots, looting, and violence. Alexander Kerensky, the chairman of the provisional government, sent troops in to deal with the demonstrators. Originally, Lenin and the Bolsheviks didn't want anything to do with the riots, but as more and more people started marching with the Bolshevik slogans and signs, Kerensky took that opportunity to deal with them. Kerensky began to arrest Bolshevik leaders, and Lenin was forced to flee to Finland. With that, Kerensky dealt with the violence, but he needed a plan to make sure this didn't happen again. He appointed General Kornilov, an anti-socialist who hated the revolution. But there was a catch. Kornilov hated the reforms of the provisional government and hated socialism even more, so he attempted to take over the government on his own. Kerensky panicked and knew that he needed help to stop Kornilov, so he released some of the Bolshevik leaders and organized the Soviets in a defense plan to stop Kornilov. While Kornilov had soldiers, the Soviets had workers. The workers whittled away at Kornilov's coup by diverting railroads, messing with telegraph lines, and talking demoralized soldiers into deserting. Kornilov's coup ended in failure. In Kornilov's failure, the Bolsheviks found success in promoting their campaign as their popularity among the people skyrocketed, and many Bolshevik leaders were elected to prime positions within the Soviet communities. The Bolsheviks were almost powerful enough to bring back Lenin and start a communist revolution. Kerensky caught wind of the revolution and started to arrest Bolshevik leaders, and that's when Lenin convinced the boys to YOLO and start the revolution now. Using their positions within the Soviet communities, the boys organized and armed the Bolshevik militias. Although there are many depictions of this uprising as some glorious and heroic uprising, it was pretty underwhelming. The Bolsheviks kind of just walked in and took control of the key points of the city. There wasn't any fighting, and no one really tried to stop them. After that, the last goal was to siege the Winter Palace and arrest the provisional government. They stormed the palace and were greeted by a force known as the Battalion of Death, which gave up immediately, and Lenin won. As far as violent, bloody, gory revolutions go, this wasn't really one of them. In the wake, Lenin's control over Russia weakened, and that resulted in a 7-year-long civil war with the Russian people against each other, and atrocities no one has ever seen before were committed. No one was safe.